Nick Schmaltz might be on the block, and if so, Winnipeg might finally have their legitimate 2C solution.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we have had a rumor that Nick Schmaltz might be on the outs in Utah, and if that's the case, I would certainly be very much in favor of the Jets poking around at the asking price. He's got 1 year left on his deal, and Winnipeg, frankly, needs to find a 2C/wing solution somewhere, which conveniently Schmaltz plays both. So you want to try and tackle two birds with one stone, even though you do still need one more roster player after that. Look, at least one of those positions you could potentially fill with Schmaltz. So that's encouraging. Also want to talk about the fact that, I've been talking a little bit about, what's coming up for the next few weeks, and I forgot Penticton's actually been canceled. So I'm hoping that the Jets maybe have something in the interim, but if not, I want to talk about the ramp up to the preseason and what I'm really excited for heading into a very unpredictable camp. And also sort of talking about what the Jets do with this blue line logjam. They've got a lot of defenders under contract and not a lot of space to give all of them ice time. So let's dive right in. But before we do, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, like I said, the Jets are apparently... And I wouldn't say this is like a direct rumor, but Yahoo Sports suggested that Winnipeg may be in on Nick Schmaltz. And it came out of an Elliot Friedman conversation the other day that Fridge, mentioned Schmaltz may be on the block. Now, Schmaltz has a year left. He's a little under $6 million for the season. And, his performance the past couple of years has fairly put him in like top six, but like second line territory, right? You're looking at, probably a solid second line center or winger, dropping about 60 odd points. He's generally been a reasonably positive shot share guy, maybe 52 to 53%, maybe not driving crazy amounts of play, but doing enough to be a very solid contributor. And on a team like Winnipeg, he would immediately be, in my mind, a really big plug and play solution. The Jets need a replacement for Ehlers. Schmaltz can do some of that. I don't like the idea of him necessarily playing wing as much as I would probably want him to be the 2C for the Jets. Not that he can't play wing, but I feel like with what Winnipeg immediately needs help with, right? It's really that 2C spot. As much as Taves, you'd love for him to hit the ground running and perform immediately at 2C level, we all know that that's probably not that realistic. And so Schmaltz could be the dude that comes in and really answers that question for you. The only problem is that it's only for a very short term. And after that, you sort of have to figure out, is he a guy that you want to keep around? By the end of his deal, he'll probably be around 30. And, locking up lots of money in 30-year-olds is always a little bit of a gamble. The Jets have kind of been doing that a little bit lately, and I do have some question about how much they want to keep doing that heading into, the next couple of years. But Schmaltz, at least for this season, is like a really good stopgap solution. I don't know if he would cost you that much. And apparently Friedman was talking about the idea that, Utah still wants to add size. And boy, gee, howdy, do I have a solution for you. His name is Luke Schenn. Schenn, you could probably make the money work. Winnipeg doesn't have a ton of cap space, but if you swap their contracts, I think you could make this work. The only trick is that the Jets probably want to at least bank a bit of extra cap space for the trade deadline. They didn't exactly use it that well last year. I would imagine this season they would prefer to have more options with it and keep their door open for acquisitions. And so having some extra cap space by the time March rolls around is probably, a little higher on their priority list. If the Jets were to make this happen, though, I think it would be an intriguing little move. You could also maybe try and offer a Logan Stanley instead. Either way, I don't personally care which you move, but if I have a preference, I would definitely go with Schenn. Stanley's younger, and like the Jets just seemingly love him anyways. He also plays on the left side, and so I feel like Winnipeg is a little more robust there in terms of the quality of puck movers. Whereas when you look at the right side, one of your best puck moving D gets benched for Schenn. And, of course, I mean Colin Miller. Miller should really just be starting routinely, right? He's pretty decent as your third pairing right-sided guy. Schenn hasn't really done much that I would say merits, the retaining. Now, he's also apparently been suggested that there's, maybe some lack of a fit with the Jets org. And I think it's partly just because he has to keep going to Nashville to be with his family. Utah doesn't really solve that either, but at least you would go from Utah to Nashville a little bit easier than trying to do, international travel for an entire season. So curious to know what his thoughts would be on that. Utah is obviously, not too dissimilar a situation from where he is right now. But again, maybe the border crossings are a little easier, might not be as hard to get back to Nashville every so often. And so, maybe he could even move his family up to Salt Lake City for a year. Might not be the craziest thing. But in terms of Schmaltz, right, I think Nick would be a very intriguing option for the Jets. And it would also be the kind of stopgap where Schmaltz himself would be the sort of guy that you would want to bring in at the trade deadline, but you've already got him locked up for the season heading into this upcoming year. And, again, I think he would be a really solid value add. I don't think the price would be crazy. I think Utah has some incentive to move his salary. The Jets may also have to give up some other forward, and that's where I don't really know how that all works. Winnipeg, right now, they've got a fair number of I would say budget contract options that you could move, some guys that they've just brought in, but none of those dudes are moving. So I don't quite know how all of that would work. I don't really imagine Tanner Pearson, Cole Koepke, or Gustav Nyquist are really eager to just move on to another team before the season's even started. That doesn't really happen in the league. And so with that in mind, you'd probably be moving one of your defenders instead. But Utah also themselves kind of has quite a few guys on their blue line under contract. So the fit is a little harder to figure out unless the Jets opt to do like a futures move. But again, the money there doesn't really work to me unless, Utah retains, which totally an option, absolutely could happen. That would make it more expensive, though, and that's where I feel like, how much is it really worth? And, if they start to have to, increase this price and make it so that Winnipeg is paying more for this, again, I don't know how I feel about that, especially with the season maybe not being the one where the Jets take the biggest swings. So I like the idea with Schmaltz under certain conditions. We'll have to see what the ask is, right? If he's not that expensive, I'm, listening. If they're trying to, dump his cap hit, okay. But I don't know that they're like super desperate for this. And Winnipeg doesn't have as easy a fit to swap some assets here, even moving some futures. So curious to know what you all think of this. Do you like the idea of bringing in a Schmaltz, or would you prefer the Jets look elsewhere? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Now, I mentioned earlier that I had forgotten Penticton has actually been canceled this year, and apparently next year, from what I understand. So we might not be seeing some Jets prospects or players for another couple of months, which is a fair bit to wait. Obviously preseason gets started pretty late in September, so we could be sitting a while before the Jets come back. But in the meantime, of course, dev camp's probably going to happen. We'll have some prospects getting some workouts and stuff. It'll be, a ramp up to the preseason. And I want to talk about what I'm looking forward to this coming preseason coming up in just a brief moment. But before we dive into that, did want to talk about our friends and partners at FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf in the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to follow some of the hottest matchups in MLS. It's been great to keep up with the season. And of course, we all know that maybe Messi is getting a little bit older, and, the shifting powers of MLS continue to swap between teams. But maybe you are really interested in Thomas Mueller moving to Vancouver. Well, if you are looking to follow along and make the most of these exciting transfers, maybe some power shifts within the MLS, maybe some veteran savvy being added to a Canadian football team, this is the best way to get in on the action. And you can even make a same game parlay, watching that bet ride into the ninth inning of a baseball game, or the second half, or even stoppage time of a soccer match. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit about when we're next going to see Winnipeg. And as of right now, it is scheduled to be September 21st, which is a fair bit to wait. Winnipeg will, of course, have some preseason stuff against a couple of Pacific Division teams and Minnesota. Lovely. We love Minnesota, right? Minnesota hockey is always one of our most entertaining matchups, I would say. But, this is an interesting one. Obviously, we are used to having some sort of a rookie tournament, and to not have one is actually slightly disappointing for me. I personally like it. I know that on paper or even on the ice, the impact is relatively minimal when it comes to your season outcomes, right? It doesn't really have much bearing. It's, what amounts to some scrimmages, but I feel like it's a pretty fun opportunity to have some of your young players and even some camp invites stretch their legs. You have some competition coming into preseason, and it would have been nice to have some of these guys who maybe don't get ordinary opportunities to fight for, some attention from the Jets brass to go out there, have a couple of good games and, maybe put on a little bit of a show. We all enjoy when Jets prospects thrive, and it just would have been really nice to see them. But of course, Vancouver canceled it this year, so not much you can do there. I wonder if the Jets opt to maybe do something small heading into preseason. But if not, it's totally okay. Selfishly, I just love the prospect stuff. I feel like I'm starting to look a little more at prospects again. I haven't had to in a while because obviously this Jets core really hasn't leaned on them in many years. But as we start to move towards this new era of Jets hockey, I do think prospects are going to play a much bigger role. So with that in mind, this preseason may or may not be the first real sign of that. Now, again, I don't know how many roster spots are actually going to be available this year for kids. I would say I am expecting at most one rookie out of camp in preseason to make the cut. And this is probably Nikita Tripikov's spot to lose. He already had a couple of goals in his first NHL debut. And Lambert, I just think the Jets are not quite as sold on yet. Brad, I know, the brass has talked about as being their answer to maybe the Jets roster right now being on the slower side. But Brad didn't exactly, soar to great heights in his brief NHL stint. And I don't know that it's really fair to have expected him to. This year and really in this era of the NHL, the skill barrier is so high that it's actually rare for young kids to be good at this level immediately. It takes probably a good 40 to 50 games before they even start to feel comfortable and get the sense of timing down. Even a 30-game sample isn't the biggest to work with. So I'm not reading too much into Lambert's injury call-up stints. Obviously, I would have liked it if he'd maybe been able to be a little more assertive and stuff, but he looked like he could keep up. And I would say in the latter stints, he looked a little more comfortable. So, this year is going to be a very interesting one for him. But again, I don't think he really has the inside track when it comes to preseason camp spots. I would think if you're looking for somebody to win a spot to the actual Jets lineup this year, it's going to be Chibrikov. Chibrikov just feels like a very plug-and-play option. you kind of know what you're getting with him, and you also know where he's going to have some lapses, right? His defensive game is not particularly robust. Now, I think in the few games he played with the Jets, he looked a little better about that than I expected, but not, he's not playing a prime role, so you're not asking him to do tons of defensive work. But, I could see a nice little middle six role for him this coming season. The Jets definitely need finishing help in their bottom six, and Tribrikov absolutely gives you that, even if it's maybe not the most elite skill, but it's, an offensive motor, and it's this type of player that the Jets are starting to draft in greater volume, guys with like a really sparky, spark plug kind of offensive style, a relentless motor, constant skating, constantly trying to put the puck towards goal, which I think is absolutely the way to go. I think the Jets, as much as we've said in the past that maybe they didn't understand in previous years where they were lacking when it came to 5v5 offense, I think they've definitely tried to address that with a lot of the recent drafts. You look at the kinds of swings that they're taking on guys with some really good projectable tool sets, and a lot of them have very repeatable styles of play that you could immediately imagine translating to some kind of a depth role with Winnipeg, and one where they're going to efficiently get the puck to the net, right? Maybe it's not going to lead to loads of points, but it's going to get you a lot of chances, and I think that's really the most important part. Just keep driving those chances, get closer to the net, and good things will typically follow after that. I think it's a good philosophy in drafting, and it's great that the Jets are trying to do that as well. And Tribrikov, I think, is one of those guys who kind of fits that mold. So he's the guy that I think I've already sort of circled in camp, but I'm also curious, as we kind of look at, some of the veterans that are coming in, Gus Nyquist, he's all right. I've had a soft spot for him in previous years. In maybe another timeline, I would have been happy about the signing more so than I currently am. He's fine. It's just in the wake of losing Ehlers, Nyquist is not exactly the stopgap that I would call upon if I'm looking for a Nick replacement. But Gus is cool. He'll do a job on your power play, and I think he'll be a reasonable finisher. The only thing with him is that you do have to worry about the speed. So I would probably put him more in the bottom of the roster. But I imagine because the Jets' wing depth isn't great right now, he may be asked to play higher minutes than you'd want right out of the gate. But for camp and preseason, we'll see how he looks. Koepka and of course Pearson, you've had some success with Pearson in the past. I think at this stage of his career, Tanner's probably on the downswing. He's been a cup winner a couple of times and certainly has a lot of veteran experience and pedigree. But again, time just catches everyone. And I think that's really been true of Pearson's game as well. So not expecting a huge preseason from him. Koepka could be a guy that you look at for your fourth line. Personally, I'm really rooting for Parker Ford. I would just love Ford to come out and have a big camp, but I do feel like the Jets have sort of labeled him for the Moose. Manitoba could honestly just use the support anyways, and Parker's been a really nice mainstay for Manitoba's top six, so hopefully, if he maybe doesn't quite make the grade in preseason, he really helps the Moose become a strong supportive environment, maybe gives Lambert and some of the other guys a lot more skill to work with. I think either way, it's a win for the org. And I've said this before, but I really feel like investing in the Moose this offseason is honestly the best thing the Jets have done. The Velarde contract, very good. But I think just personally, I look at that Moose investment maybe as the best thing Winnipeg has really put forth. They spent a fair bit of money to put that team back on a better track. They've made some big acquisitions and signings, and hopefully it leads to a lot more success. Last year was just, I felt bad for the team, right? I felt bad for a lot of the kids on that team. It just wasn't a good environment. I think a lot of guys were probably frustrated. And so hopefully the Moose get back to being a much more respectable regular season squad. They may not have the chops for the playoffs, but that's part of the whole exchange, right? If you're having good NHL success, your AHL teams usually suffer from it. So it's really a bit of a give and take. But I think this could be a very interesting season for a lot of the young kids. Preseason, I really want to see some big battles. I think I'm probably most excited about preseason right now than I've been in years. I really think that we have some upstart young players who are going to be fighting for roster spots. We've got wild cards like Barlow, who I still don't really have a clear read on. You've heard me voice my concerns about some of the stylistic things in this game, but maybe the pro development team has helped him along this summer. We'll see as we come into that. Braden Yeager continues to be one of my big X factors for a potential call-up and maybe even an NHL debut here early in the season. I think he's a guy that is going to be a lot closer than people realize, especially if his previous showing at camp last year is anything to go by. So, the Jets' future looks very interesting. Obviously there's some murkiness around a lot of the existing core, but if we're talking about future Jets, Winnipeg has a couple of interesting irons in the fire. There may not be the next Scheifele or Ehlers or Connor immediately visible, but we've got a lot of guys who could become maybe a future Perreault or something of that nature. And it gives you some stability in your platform to start building on top of that as you amass more futures, maybe make a couple of big swings. I think that there's stuff for the Jets here to work with. So get ready for August and September. The countdown is really starting. When you really think about it, we're about 7 odd weeks away from preseason. So I'm ready for Jets hockey to be back. I'm really interested in the season. We will see how it all unfolds. But amidst that, there is one question that I am still sitting on, aside from the KFC deal. It's how you clear this Jets D logjam. You've got a few too many blue line contracts, and it does seem like the Jets need to move at least one. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we were just chatting a little bit about, the Jets and their kind of quirky little contract situation they've got going. Right now, you look at the contract listings for the blue line, and the Jets have a lot of dudes under contract, a few too many in my mind, actually. It's not unusual for teams to carry a few extra depth guys, but Winnipeg has like 3 or 4 dudes who have been fighting for the third pairing spot for like the whole season now, and they just re-signed one of them to a 2-year deal. Hayden Fleury, he's a nice guy and seems to have fit in relatively okay as a 7th D, but I think the Jets might be expecting a little more from him, and I don't know if I necessarily see it that way. But again, he's cheap. He looked okay in the playoffs. In terms of shot share metrics and stuff, you probably don't want to look at that so closely. They weren't great, but at least he can move the puck a little more efficiently than Stanley does. How much that really matters, I don't know. But in terms of the Jets needing to maybe free up a spot or two, I think the Schenn thing is probably priority number 1 if you're looking at the blue line. Luke just isn't really a good fit for the team. I hate to say it. He's a nice guy, and I think the concept of him was nice when the Jets brought him in, right? He was going to be a stabilizing force, a guy who's smart enough to know that because he's not fleet of foot, he's going to be a pass-first sort of defender. He's got some strength and physicality and can throw some big hits, yada, yada, yada. I think it made a lot of sense in that respect, but the outcome was kind of worst-case scenario in a lot of ways. The foot speed was just too slow, right? And it really hurt the Jets in transition, and ultimately it cost them some goals here and there. And I hate to pick on guys individually, but, it's one of those situations where when there are some clear links in the chain that are struggling, it's going to be one of the scenarios where you might have to make the move, right? And we saw Colin Miller come in later in the playoffs after Schenn really did struggle, and Miller was such a game changer for Winnipeg, right? Got the puck up the ice faster. He'll still have some of those D-lapses. We know Colin Miller's game. He's a shoot-first kind of guy. If ever there was a dude who just bombs it from the blue line, it's Colin, right? Sometimes to the detriment of the team. But for the most part, you know what you're getting with him, and he gets the puck up the ice a lot faster. So Schenn, he's almost $3 million in cap hit, which is quite a bit. 3%'s not anything to sort of sniff at, especially for this upcoming season. And the Jets kind of need to get a little more room, I would say, not just on the roster, but also in cap space. They're down to a little bit under $5 million, which is still decent, but it's not a ton. And if they want to bring in a Schmaltz or something, they probably want to free a bit of extra room so that they can have some stuff heading into the trade deadline, especially if they're in a position to start buying in March. But As far as other guys are concerned, Ville Heinola probably should also just get waived. I think at this point, Winnipeg is not going to give him the chance that he wants. And I don't really feel the value of keeping him waiting for an opportunity that's just not coming. I like Heinola a lot. I think that there was a version of him at some point that could have been, an interesting third pairing puck mover at the right situation and scenario, but Winnipeg is not going to do that. The league wants big defenders, and a lot of these guys end up overseas. They might put up really good shot share metrics and move the puck really efficiently, but the league doesn't seem to value that anymore. So because they don't throw big hits, because they're not 6 foot whatever, the league is kind of getting away from that. So waive Heinola, find a trade partner for Schenn. And I think if you're rolling Miller, Stanley, and Fleury as your rotating cast on the third pairing, that's fine. It's not ideal. I don't love it, but it's fine, right? And you sort of have a projection in a couple of years for Salamonson to slide back into your top 4 as he continues to improve at the AHL level. So, for this team, the blue line logjam is probably not that hard to clear. I just think it would help solve some issues and also give the Jets a little more, clarity on what they need going into, their depth reserves and stuff, and maybe even provide an opportunity for a depth call-up. Maybe Salamonson gets his NHL debut this year too. It wouldn't be more for more than just like a game or two, but hey, rewarding the kids with a day or a couple of days of NHL salary is actually pretty significant. Really important not to undersell that, especially for those who have really busted their tails off and really performed well with the Moose. So lots of interesting stuff for the kids. I know this year is not going to be a big one for the rookies. So especially with the blue line, you're not going to see really any young players sliding in there. But as time goes on, guys are getting older. The team's getting older. There will be some chances for young players like Salamonson to really make their mark. Sasha Boumedienne down the road as well. Alphonse Frey, he signed his ELC recently. He could make it in a couple of years. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting transition point for the Jets, and I am intrigued to see how Winnipeg balances all of this with their stated desire to win the Cup. But would love to hear your thoughts on what you're looking forward to out of camp and who you would move off the blue line. Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day every day. We'll be back here either Thursday or Friday, so see you then. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.